as I said, tonight, I have a very short video about cultural humility. It's really just 2 or 3 minutes long. And then, I wanted to give you guys an opportunity, and I'll share a few stories of my practice through the years and experiences that I've had with cross-cultural experiences. But I encourage you to look at the materials, listen to my lecture, and update yourself on some of those things. And hopefully we've been talking about that culture, weaving it in and out of our discussions. And I have appreciated you guys in the discussion posts, talking about culture, and I encourage you to, if it's relevant, to talk about that in your presentations as well, because it is something that is so important and part of our code of ethics. So, so I wanted to encourage you to review those materials, and there are questions about it on the quiz. So that's the least important part of why you should review it, but an important part nonetheless. Oh, also, I wanted to highlight from what I've already emailed you guys, that there is an extra credit opportunity. And originally, I usually offer it as an additional point on top of your grade. And when we had like the pluses and minuses, 1 point could make a real difference. But when we have like a 10-point thing, 1 point is not that interesting. So I increased it to depending on how you respond, you can get up to 4 points added onto your final grade. So if you are on the borderline, which I'm not sure anybody is, but and you want to kick it up over that 10% mark, you might want to engage in that. In any event, I think it's a really interesting article about culture and grieving and the difference between American culture and Cuban culture. And so, and given a lot of the things that we've been talking about public mourning and the things that we've experienced this year with the death of Queen Elizabeth and the public mourning that happened in the UK, that was just a really fascinating and interesting thing to watch. So I just commend that article to you in any event, whether you decide to do the extra credit or not. And also that the assignment was to review 6 presentations in addition to your own, and I have lowered that to 4 because we have fewer groups. We have more large groups this time. The last several classes I've had people work in pairs a lot more, so there's a lot more groups of 4, so we have a lot fewer groups. So all you have to do is look at 4 presentations, and you can either do that live by signing in. You can look at the spreadsheet where you signed in and see when other people are presenting and show up. And then all you have to do is sign in. But then I will be recording all the presentations and posting them on a discussion post. And so at that point, you can view it and post a comment showing that you have watched it, something substantive. So the easier thing is to show up in person. But you will have an option to watch it later as well. So, okay.
So I'm sorry, I just wanted to be clear. So for the, if we show up and we're part of the presentation or we're watching the presentations live, then there's no need to give additional feedback. It's only if we do it later on. Okay.
Right. That's okay. Right.
Thank you.
Just so that I have some indication that you've watched it. so if you leave a comment about, what you've watched, then that'll show me that you at least watched the opening credits. So, but yeah, if you show up, and it's nice to show up because, supporting your colleagues and having somebody for them to talk to other than me. So. Any other questions about anything, that's coming up, or anything that we've talked about this semester or term? Okay, let me share this video. You guys can see my screen? And let me know if you're not hearing it, but you should be able to.
At Bombas, we make the comfiest
Sorry.
socks, underwear,
I love
and
Bombas
t-shirts
socks, by the
that
way.
feel good and
Cultural competency and cultural humility. You may have heard these terms before, possibly in the context of healthcare settings, and not quite understood what they meant. Let's go over what these terms mean and how they apply to everyday life. To be culturally competent is to learn about other cultures, control your biases, and adapt your behaviors and communication style considering the background of people around you. The goal of cultural competency is effective and informed interaction across various cultures. At face value, cultural competency sounds ideal, but it may actually lead us to rely on generalizations about certain groups rather than recognizing the uniqueness of each individual. We also have to ask ourselves, is it realistic or even possible for people to learn everything about other cultures and become completely bias-free? That's where cultural humility comes in. To be culturally humble is to be aware of social power imbalances, respect other people's values and beliefs, and continuously reflect on your own biases. With cultural humility, there's no expectation that you memorize everything there is to know about other groups. Instead, it's a lifelong process of asking yourself how your own biases might impact the way you treat and understand others, alongside work to minimize that impact. Cultural competency is a goal, while cultural humility is a mindset. Let's go over a few ways to practice cultural humility in our daily lives. Recognize that no culture is superior to another. Become comfortable with reflecting on and acknowledging mistakes you've made. Be honest when you're not sure about something. Learn about other cultures with the awareness that you'll never reach perfect understanding. Ask the people in your life if you can have open discussions and hold each other accountable during your learning journey. The great thing about cultural humility is that it acknowledges that no one can get it right all the time. In fact, a key component of cultural humility is being open about what we haven't learned yet. Although it can feel really uncomfortable to admit when we're wrong or don't know something, that vulnerability leaves room for us to continuously learn, grow, and promote equity and inclusion in our communities.
So, and as you saw or will see this week in the course materials, cultural humility is now part and parcel of our code of ethics. And so it is something that that our profession has adopted as a standard as we go and practice with diverse cultures. And and like they said in the video, cultural competency, which is was always sort of the standard, sort of leads us into maybe some generalizations rather than seeing people as individuals, even within a culture. And recognizing that people may be part of many different cultures. And and what that means to them. I had in hospice, we had a family several years ago now where they were coming onto hospice. The patient was coming onto hospice, and it was a family that had a Hispanic last name. And so the marketer gave them materials all in the Spanish language. This family did not speak Spanish. Many of them had, it was second, third generation people that lived here, and the ones that did were so proud of the fact that their family worked hard to learn English, and so it was an affront to them, to present those materials and to assume that this is what they needed because of their last name. Those kinds of things that, like it said in the video, ask questions, be curious. And people appreciate that. They appreciate when you ask them what they need. What is it about their culture, about their, I'm just trying to close something here, about their experience that, that would help them, that would help you to meet their needs. So one of the most, I guess you'd say traumatic, but it was a difficult experience when I worked in hospice. We had a family that they belonged to a Christian sect. And so, you make assumptions that, frankly, we didn't ask a lot of questions about it. And so there was always a feeling that they were rather secretive about what was going on. And we didn't feel welcome, in particular our chaplain and social worker. They let them come in, but there was always a strange vibe about the experience. So for 2 days, the family would not let anyone from hospice in. So the nurse was not allowed in, the aide was not allowed in, and certainly the social worker and chaplain were not allowed in. And because of the vibe and everything, everybody just had a really difficult sense about it. And we knew that the patient had been declining. And so there was a real concern. So finally, our boss made the decision to call the sheriff and ask for a welfare check. And as it turns out, the patient had passed away the day before. And as we found out through this experience, their religious tradition required that they had a belief that it was a possibility, if God willed it, that person would be resurrected in 3 days. So the body was not to be moved for 3 days. Had we known that ahead of time, we might have been able to negotiate something, and with, because when the sheriff went, they had to require that, no, you can't keep a body here for 3 days, you got to go. And so it was a whole traumatic thing for the family, for our staff, and for everything. So what we took away from that and learned from that is, always ask, always be curious. Is there something that we can do? Is there something about your tradition that we can help with to make sure that this, that we can support you in? And had we known that, we may have been able to negotiate something, in terms of, can we take the body to the funeral home where it will stay, but we won't do any embalming. We won't, or something. We might have been able to work with them, but and it would have been less traumatic for all concerned. So that was a learning experience. And another experience that was good was, I had a lot of patients who were in nursing homes, and I had several patients actually who were Buddhist. And the traditional Buddhist experience is that the body cannot be touched for, I believe it's been a while for me, but like 8 hours. And so that presents a couple of problems. Number one is a nursing home does not want the body to stay there for that long. And number two, a nurse has to pronounce. And to pronounce, they have to put a stethoscope to listen for the heart. So we were able to, talk with our doctor and say, okay, instead of listening for the heart, we're going to watch for respirations. We're going to hold a mirror. We're going to do those things. And we're going to let the nursing home know ahead of time, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have somebody stay with the body. So it won't be a burden on your staff and all of those things. So knowing those things and being able to honor that tradition was a possibility. Another thing with that is that many times it really depends on how many generations, removed an immigrant family may be, because some Buddhist families will say to me, we'll just do an hour. If we can just do an hour, that's fine with us. Or, so there's different interpretations, or at least different practices, the further away you get from the first generation, perhaps. Not always. Some communities are very insular, and so their traditions don't change from generation to generation. So again, asking questions, being curious, and being empathetic. Those are the things that are, make for meaningful practice and meaningful engagement in any context, not just in the context of grief and bereavement, and grief and loss. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe talk about your own culture or about your own experiences with cultures, not only in context of grief and loss, but in any experiences that you've had that might be informative to us as a class. No one came with a story tonight. I've got a ton of them, so don't. We talked about in one of my lectures about finding an ally within a culture, or a cultural broker, I guess is what we called it in the lecture. And that can be somebody in the community, that, like somebody like at the Asian American Culture Society, or a colleague that you might have. It may be someone within the family, well, although that's not preferred, but somebody that you can consult with and say, you know what, I have this going on. But one of the examples that I have, again, working in hospice, where a lot of my grief and bereavement experience is coming from. Years ago, I would have experience in the Hispanic community where, as a social worker, one of my jobs was to help people prepare for the death and to pick a funeral home, and make some preliminary arrangements so that at the time of the death, that's one thing that's not a stress on the family. But in the Hispanic community, at least in the first generation immigrants, that was a taboo subject, because if you talked about it, it would make it so, and it would also say to your loved one, I want you to go. It was a taboo subject. So sometimes what I was able to do was talk with a grandchild, an adult grandchild, and they would be like, just give me the information. I'll pick something out and we'll be okay. Just don't say anything to my mom or my grandma about it. And then at the time of death, it would be, well, here's this, it's already done. So sometimes it's, things change interesting, you might want to think about this for the quiz, that traditions change as they are passed down from generation to generation. But as I say, that's not always the case, so it's always good to ask. Any questions about cultural humility and what that means?
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's 100% relevant, but I'm thinking as far as like culture, if we're looking at like maybe like teenagers as right, can we maybe think of it that way? And maybe instead of culture, generationally, and just like, that's something that I don't know, I'm struggling with right now. My placement is at a school, and we've had over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of loss. A lot of the parents have died, close people in the family have died. And it's just like it's harder for them. They aren't showing a lot of empathy to each other. And so that's just something hard to work through. And I think it might be generational. I think it's also like, it's uncomfortable for them. And so I just think like, I'm thinking of asking, I don't know, there have been a lot of people that have talked about grief and how we can kind of address it, I guess, as a group, but I just was thinking of them like as kind of their own culture a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's developmental considerations with kids that age, and you know, what their brains are able to process and how. But there's also, you know, culture is a lot of things.
Yes.
And it's, you know, it involves language and dress and you know, all this. So social workers, we have our own culture. We have words that we use that other people don't use and on a daily basis. And it's the same with, you know, elders, you know, have a different cultural mindset than a teenager or you know, Gen Z or Gen X, you know, because we've all had different experiences, and we all, God knows, teenagers use different language than I know. And so, so there is that piece of it too. How do you relate to them developmentally, but also within their culture? You know, suicide hotlines have had to adapt to that. A lot of times, a lot of suicide hotlines now operate with texts as well as phone calls, because younger people have not, that's how they communicate. That's their language now. It's more comfortable for them. When they're in crisis, they're not going to pick up the phone and talk to somebody. They're going to text. So figuring out, you know, those different cultural norms, yes, that's at play with teenagers, definitely.
Yeah.
And especially teenagers who have gone through COVID, a lockdown.
Oh, yes, so much. Yes. I wonder if that's almost like a weird culture, you know, like a cultural divide almost. Ugh, like it was like, we're all stunted, you know, this weird way, like, because I think, you know, it's affecting everyone, but especially like when you're out of school too. And like with kids, you can see every age group and how,
and how they form relationships now, you know,
for sure. All of it,
for better or worse, you know. And I was reading an article, and this is, I guess, going far afield a little bit, but how we are all becoming much more isolated even now. You know, now that we have the opportunity to, you know, get together, you know, it might not be as wise, but we, you know, people are having parties again and things like that. And people are just choosing to stay, you know, stay at home and being much more, you know, to themselves. So, and I think that's, you know, that's a product probably of some of what we've gone through in the past 2.5 years. So almost 3 years now.
Yeah, for sure.
But yes, culture, as you know, as you'll see in your materials this week, it's a lot of things, and people can be part of many different cultures.
Mhm.
I have a question,
Mm-hmm.
Professor Rose. Does, in this section, will we talk about intersectionality at all?
Tell me a little bit more.
In regards to culture
Mhm.
and how different parts of an individual intersect. Do you
Yeah.
know if we get into that?
Yeah, in a very surface way.
Okay.
And just kind of like what I talked about, having an awareness that one person can be, or identify with a number of cultures, and not just, because we have families that are multiracial or
Right.
multi-ethnic or multi-religious.
Mhm.
But as I said, you can be in and the mainstream American culture, whatever that means now, but also a social worker, or also a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim. You can identify with, many different, and you're of a different age. But I don't get into any depth in the materials, but certainly that's something that's raised. Yeah. And the LGBT culture, and you can be, part of that, and part of, the Christian culture, and the, social work culture, or, and different companies have their own kind of culture. This company, is, and we're seeing that played out on a larger stage with like Elon Musk. He's, trying to change the culture of, his Twitter by saying, okay, everybody, if you want to stay here, you got to work 90 hours a week. Whereas there are, that was the traditional tech culture, we love it. We have sleeping bags on the floor because we're working on these things. And then other companies are like, you clock in, you clock out, and that's your day. And so, all those different and one culture is going to affect, you might have be part of one culture that's going to affect your relationship with another culture. So if you're in the LGBT culture, if you are, either an ally or an individual, an LGBTQ, plus individual, A plus individual, or an ally, and you're in, working in a company whose culture is hostile to that, those things are going to be at odds. And you either work towards changing the culture. Ray, you're saying they definitely, in the oil and gas, they definitely have their own culture. Yeah.
It's a different world, that's not my company. That's by the people I know who work for Conoco or Chevron or BP. It's just a different world.
Yeah. Definitely. And I have friends that work in oil and gas and who are also environmentalists. And, those cultures, clash at times too. But then you find that one culture can inform or reform another culture too. We've seen that a lot in the LGBTQ community, has really reformed a lot, I believe, religious communities. Religious communities that were either neutral or negative towards that community because they felt like they were out there. And so then they were like, nope, we're right here. Here we are. You know us, we're good Christians too, or good Muslims too, or good Jews too. So, and they're like, oh, okay, maybe our thinking is, or our interpretations or whatever aren't that way. So I think that communities can really help to enlighten and change, bring change to the other communities that they're in. So when I was growing up back in the, well, long time ago, we were, in our social studies class, we were taught about the great melting pot that is America. People come from all over the world, and they all assimilate, and here we are, like the Borg. And over the years, we've learned that that's not, how it works, and two, it's not a healthy way to form a society. And so, people that have come from all over, which, unless we are Native Americans, we all have, or our ancestors have, we have all shaped and changed the culture, the American culture, and continue to do so, God willing. So that's, I guess I wanted to put that out there too. But yes, cultures can inform and enlighten. And cultures can also oppress. And we see that a lot. And so having that awareness, and that when I was at U of H, the GCSW, the zeitgeist was, and probably still is, how to think critically, how to look at things critically. And in my mind, that all comes down basically to empathy, looking at it and seeing another's point of view, and knowing that our point of view is not the be all and end all, and looking at things from the point of view of oppressed communities. And and being aware that, cultures can oppress other cultures too, if we're not thinking critically and if we're not thinking with empathy.
One of the things they said in the video that really stuck out to me was just having people in your life where you can ask, like, hey, will you hold me accountable? And do that, because I think, right, I've talked about this before, but not here, everywhere else. But I just feel like that's something too, that like, if we say that we're kind of like self-manage our humility, right? Our cultural humility, and like, oh, I keep learning and growing, but it's like, sometimes we get to a point where like we're in a bubble, we're very like insulated. And so we are with people who think like us and look like us and agree, and I think that it's important to have someone that's like, whoa, you have to check yourself. So
yeah, and to be open to that.
Yes, so much.
The PowerPoint that is on your Blackboard that I had used for several years. A few years ago, it was on a Zoom, so it must have been since COVID. I was showing this PowerPoint, and one of my students said, those images that you use, they were all like cartoon images. And they're like, that's really racist, or this image is really offensive. Or I had a couple where it was like a white therapist and an African-American client, and it was like the white therapist was hovering over, and it's just like, that's really kind of offensive. And it's like, and I looked at it because I hadn't really looked at it for years. And I was like, you're right. And I just totally redid the whole PowerPoint, and it probably still has, but just being open to that new perspective, that even somebody that's schooled in that, for years, I still come at it from a middle-aged white middle-class perspective, and and look at how great I am. I put a Black person in my PowerPoint, you know? So to be open to that, that constructive criticism. And it was offered in a very respectful way, but it was still, you know, hey, that's not cool. Well, if nobody has any other comments or questions, this was great. I appreciate you all coming, and I hope that you have, let me see if there's any other things in the chat. No, just somebody asking who the, oh, Ray, you were asking, was that the super achievers, the ones that have already taken the quiz? Is that what you meant?
I want their names.
So, but I hope you guys have a great week. And if you know that you're working on, there's a lot of stuff coming up for this class. If you have any questions or anything, just reach out. And next week we'll start with the presentations. And can't believe we're wrapping everything up already. So just have a great week. Be gentle with yourselves, and next time we see you, we'll be, unless we're, you know, doing office hours, we'll be doing presentations. So have a great evening, and thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Professor, real quick,